another really interesting score here from Ruurt, who has had his works evaluated a few times, and I really enjoyed the freshness of it, and there are a lot of really great features. I'm going to point out strengths and weaknesses as usual, but let's talk about these harps first of all. Now, by now, I think everybody is probably getting used to the whole idea that some of the harp scoring, just harp scoring in general, along the same lines as the rhythmic pulses, is something that, probably is not going to come out very well. And in this case, I would say yes. Like, the harp is so close in proximity, the first harp is so close in proximity to the trombones, it's just really not going to cut through. And then when it starts to bounce off of the trumpets, it's gone. However, that doesn't mean that this is a bad idea. This first harp part could easily be scored onto the violins and violas. You already have some of it in the cello part, pizzicato, the D right here, same D as the harp. So if this were to be scored pizzicato onto the first and seconds and the viola, then it would make sense. This also is probably going to be pretty much inaudible. If there's some way of transporting this into the lower strings and their pizzicato ideas, then that would be great. You do have a lot of weight here with your clarinets and bassoons and so on, horns. I think that gives it, it's probably just not even necessary to have this harp idea at all, except like maybe a little bit more weight in the bass. If there were a pitch that could be alternated maybe with one of your other lower instruments, or if you had a contrabassoon in there, that would also be really helpful. Now, I'm really liking this whole idea here of fifths with the root note doubled. I think that's really effective because, it puts the focus on the root instead of the fifth, and then the fifth just becomes more of an overtone, right? It'll still come out clearly, especially with the first player playing it and wanting to lead, but it still won't dominate as much as it could to sort of take away from the strength of that melody. So it's a very cool idea, and the reactions are done pretty well. The overall rhythm here in the lower heavy brass and timpani is great. I mean, you've got a mixture of E's and D's here. I feel, once again, contrabassoon could have been really helpful here in having a more of a D versus E kind of feeling. So there was more E in the bass, right? Because you really are giving the heaviest instruments a D rather than an E, right? Like, so timpani, tuba, bass trombone, they're all playing Ds. So the D is going to dominate, not the E, which is really the E is the tonality. The D is really like a seventh being sort of inverted, stuck up right against the root. And so the E should be a little clearer, is all I'm trying to say. And it's, the only real E's that you've got here are the root of your divisi. Well, some of these don't have to be divisi. Like I've said before, this particular idea, having an E7th in the double bass, it does not have to be divisi because the D can be played on the A string and the E can be played on the lowest string, and you can pluck. You can do a pizzicato non-divisi on double bass if it's really easy to pluck if the strings are right next to each other. So this did not have to be divided. Of course, this that'll be a little bit trickier, right? There are things you can get away with pizzicato in non-divisi that you can't with bowing. Like, for instance, you can pluck two strings that are divided by a string in the middle, divisi, non-divisi, where you couldn't do that bowing. So, there are some exceptions to every rule. Okay, so if you were to throw this, like just to finish up here on pizzicato, if you were going to put pizzicato in your upper strings, then throwing this harp part like 2 octaves higher, I think that would come out really, really nicely. Then, then this really becomes the overtone of the upper string pizzicati, and it'll have a harp sound, right? It'll exaggerate the sense that harps are playing. And of course, like right in here, this reaction is just really, that will not come out at all, just because of the weight of the other parts around it. This is a little strange. Piano, mezzo forte, piano, forte. Was this perhaps a reaction to the sound of the sound set? Because I just really don't see why this should be P and that should be mezzo forte, right? And then that should be P again, and then this should be forte. I mean, I can kind of see. Yeah, I can kind of see that you're not wanting to overwhelm things here, and then this coming in stronger because this is an accent, and then here you are sort of letting this take over. And I also don't see the need for this particular hit to be so short, like just 2 beats long. This could have been tied, I think, to the next bar, and just let it vibrate. Okay, so back to scoring. Horns and oboes take over, and that is a really beautiful way to stack things. Just for everybody who is like not paying attention, this is the scores in C. So these are the actual pitches of the horns. So this is a really effective way to score horns plus oboes, and if you've been following along some of my lectures in Holst, and especially Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, then you know that this can be a very effective combination of horns and oboes. They really do have a wonderful affinity for one another. But then here, it's just nothing but oboes. That is a nice idea to sort of cut everything out, just so long as you make sure that everything else underneath it is not too strong, right? And there's a bit less weight here because there are just 3 rhythmic little stabs there. So that kind of works, but you really should mark up your oboes at this point. Have them like say sempre forte or even like fortissimo or some other kind of thing. Just like bring them up a little bit, crescendo, whatever. But they need to have more. If you're not going to give them any other kind of support, then they need to themselves be louder, right? Like accented or I don't know what. But, you decide, you're the arranger, but this isn't loud enough to really carry the part from this denser texture here. So what follows is pretty good, though. I do like the clarinets matched up with the horns here. I'm thinking that like this should be forte, right? This should all be forte, right? And then this should be mezzo forte, the horns supporting, right? So if this is mezzo forte, this is forte, you really do need to mark this entrance after so many tacits, so much of a tacit and a new function, right? So this should really be marked, and it should be forte to match whatever's going on in the oboes. And then the horns, if they can stay mezzo forte, and everybody else can just stay forte, it's fine. Even the heavy brass, because these are just little stabs, right? Or you could go mezzo forte with accents on the offbeats. So in this here, when we get to the reaction really has to react more, right? I feel that this is where you bring out the accents. So, accented oboes, and once again, there's just really kind of a lack of support here. I don't think that they have enough to carry over what needs to happen here, right? So this needs to be bigger, your reaction needs to be bigger, and your oboes need to be more supported. Why not just bring back this pitch and just stick it right under the oboes, but still mezzo forte, right? And then the heavy brass can be staccato or marcato or some other kind of thing that that can just really feel imperative, if you know what I mean. Feel that it's really pushing forward. Then on the next page, I feel that there are some really great opportunities here that just need to be fixed. Okay, so for instance, you were using the second harp sort of as an alternating plucking idea with this beautiful interplay with your first and second violins. And there is some support of that going on. It's sort of doubling from below what's going on with the piccolo and first flute. By the way, this shouldn't say FL1, it should say just FL, right? Or FL1 and 2. So so that is all a really cool idea, but the harps are just really they're in the wrong octave. If you just made all of this an octave higher, then it would have a chance of being heard, right? This would be not bad harp scoring, okay? It's and credit to you that you tried to work out where the pedal changes were going to have to be. I think that's great. But, everything should be an octave higher if you really want it to be audible, especially this part in here, when you want this beautiful phrasing to come through. If you have piccolo up at this octave higher pitch, it is going to take away the effectiveness of the harp. If you have passages like this with harp and piccolo going on at the same time, it's really way better to score the harp at the pitch of the piccolo rather than having it be an octave below, because putting the piccolo an octave above the harp tends to take away a lot of the harp's effectiveness. You'll still hear some of the pluck, but you just won't hear very much of the tone, right? So, yeah, if you were to hike these harps up an octave, I think that they would sound a lot better. You don't have to change the pizzicato in the violins at all, okay? But you do have to do something about the way everything else is scored, all right? So, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a look at the pizzicato going on in first and second violins, okay? And the, da da ba 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 doo dee ba 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 doo doo dee da da da. Okay, so that's all good, and it is being doubled an octave higher by piccolo and first flute, and then the second flute is doubling the piccolo at an octave below. Okay, so that's a really, really nice, very penetrating sound. Okay, and it can stand on its own. So the whole question is whether or not it is being properly supported from below by everything else. Okay, is it being overwhelmed? The way that you have it scored here, the heavy brass is going to overwhelm the rest of what's going on. So let's see why, okay? Let's determine why. So there is a rhythmic interplay in the original piano part, and that the interplaying, the alternating notes are being expressed by second harp, the this group. Once again, you seem to like this grouping a lot here, which is to use clarinets, bassoons, and horns, and you have them voiced in a really nice way. I think that this is a very effective way of putting all those notes together. Okay, so good on you. However, you have to watch out, because as you descend into trumpets and then into the rest of the heavy brass, and it gets lower and lower, you're doing this because you need to get more and more intense of a flavor, and you need to get lower and lower, right? Okay, but the problem is that you have gentler instruments descending into places where they're easier, the actual melody, the main idea of the piece, will easily get covered by the interplay between the two melodic ideas. Okay, so I mean, since you already used up your lower winds and your horns, you've kind of got nobody. I mean, you can't really descend into them without sort of repeating this timbre, right? You could have alternated this with having more, having the heavy brass have more to do here in this kind of support, and then having the lower winds take over more of the duties, right? And also, just to be really frank about it, you may have enough already with the oboes interacting up here. However, you do not have to throw this idea away. You just have to really balance what's going on here. All right, this is the way that this is scored. This is not balanced, and also there's a kind of a applied dynamic here, right? As this descends, this really is it seems to be settling down in terms of its reaching quality. It's calming down as we go. This part in here is what is supposed to be a loud reaction to the end of this phrase, right? But instead, you have everybody playing mezzo forte, right? So it would be better for you to naturally diminuendo everything, right? To naturally quiet things down, to have your trumpets and have all of your heavy brass here marked much lower, right? So say this is all forte, okay, and that's fine. And then trumpets come in mezzo forte, same thing. By the time we get here, we still have diminuendo going on. So this could be mezzo piano or piano, and this could be just piano going all the way through here. Accompanying like a release of energy rather than an exaggeration of energy. And then you could come back strong here. Bum, 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 da, da, dum. Do you see what I mean? So let's take a look at those last few bars and, of the scoring. And I think that at a certain point you just sort of have to ask yourself, how long can I keep going pizzicato? I think at this point it might be better to have the strings come in at tenuto, right? So that they have nice long bows on this, because otherwise they will kind of get buried with the force of the trumpet here, and the overtones. Their overtones will kind of get swallowed up by the higher flutes again, like because like there's sort of a difference of about a seventh here between this and that. So it's not a hugely different sound as to what happened before, right? You're just really, really relying on your flutes. So there's no real contrast here, and you're also pushing both the piccolo and the second flute into places where that kind of stomping response is extremely weak. I mean, and that's another critique here. Like, as the flute descends here into places where it's weaker and weaker and weaker, you are sort of riding over it in these louder sounds from the heavy brass, especially the trumpet. Will just basically, as the lower you get with your flute right in here, the easier it will be to cover by the oboes and the trumpets. So in this case, I would say you probably should change at this point to a different wind instrument, and you should be really careful about this lower line, right? Maybe a clarinet could come in and take over at right about here, or even from about right here, so that it just sort of stays the same quality all the way through. And, just the piccolo cannot compete with, once you get down to A and then F sharp and so on, that will just get swallowed up. Against the flute in its much stronger register. it would be better for this line and this line here to be scored in just the two flutes and just forget about the piccolo from that point. Or you could take this entire idea and put it onto the clarinets, because they will sound consistent all the way through, and they can compete. At least timbrally, they can compete with the trumpets, so long as the trumpets aren't too loud. See, like mezzo forte here and then forte on everybody else is fine, right? So mezzo forte in the heavy brass, or forte in the heavy brass and fortissimo in all the other instruments. That would be fine. But I would say, just this. Anytime that the music gets very stompy, the harps are pretty much useless unless they're doing like a glissando or some kind of filigree, some kind of decoration on top. They are, they're just like really going to sort of be useless. Okay, that's pretty much all I have to say about this score. One kind of word of advice here, maybe, and that is just to mark simple. When you're dealing with timpani, just mark a simple quarter note as much as you possibly can. Eighth note when you're playing the half beat, and like for instance here, this is really what I'm thinking of here. Unless you really want this to be secco, right? Then there's kind of no sense in making that an eighth note. All right, but look, your scoring is getting better and better, Ruurt, and just really, it's really great to see something with so many interesting ideas, and also see the potential of how easy it would be to fix. Like the easier it is to fix a score, then like kind of the better the general approach, and also the better the imagination that is being put into it. So thank you so much for sharing this, and let's take a look at the next score.